Hendrix was always pushing the envelope.
He had stage presence. He had a good sense of humor. He was respectful, polite. He learned very fast.
And he started, he said, I like that song that y'all had called Twist and Shout. And he started playing it. I said, oh my.
They got two guitar players, but we got Jimi.
Fame ain't all sunshine and rainbows. And even for Jimi Hendrix, the iconic lefty guitarist who rocked the world, it's got its dark sides. On stage, he's a legend, shredding his guitar with mad skills and pure ecstasy. But what's really going on behind the scenes?
Jimi never seemed like he was happy to me.
And he had superficial relationships all around him.
Real sound clipstick around as we dive into the mystery of Jimi Hendrix's wild life, as his 55-year-old son spills the tea on rumors that have kept fans and historians guessing for years. But before we get into the heavy stuff, let's rewind and talk about the nightmares that haunted Jimi from his early days. Early life, Jimi Hendrix was a mix of African-American and maybe Cherokee descent. His grandpa, Bertrand Philander Ross Hendrix, was born in 1866 from a scandalous affair between a woman named Fanny and a super-rich grain merchant from Urbana, Ohio, or Illinois. Jimi's grandma, Zenora Nora Rose Moore, was a former dancer and vaudeville performer who co-founded Fountain Chapel in Hogan's Alley. They moved to Vancouver, Canada, and had a son, James Allen Hendrix, on June 10, 1919, who everyone called Al. Fast forward to 1941, Al moved to Seattle and met Lucille Jeter at a dance. They got hitched on March 31, 1942. Lucille's dad, Preston Jeter, had a similar background to Bertrand, and her mom, Clarice, had African-American ancestors who were enslaved. Right after the wedding, Al got drafted into the U.S. Army for World War II. Then, on November 27, 1942, Johnny Allen Hendrix, a.k.a. Jimi, was born in Seattle, the first of Lucille's 5 kids. In 1946, his parents switched his name to James Marshall Hendrix to honor Al and his late brother, Leon Marshall. Jimi's dad, Al, was stationed in Alabama and got totally shafted on leave by his boss, who threw him in the slammer to stop him from ditching to Seattle. Al spent 2 months in lockdown, and that's when he got a telegram saying his kid was born. Meanwhile, Jimi's mom, Lucille, was hustling to raise him with a lot of help from family and friends. Al finally got out of the Army with honors on September 1, 1945. 2 months later, he couldn't find Lucille, so he rolled up to Berkeley, California to see Mrs. Champ, a family friend who had taken care of Jimi and even tried to adopt him. That's when Al finally laid eyes on his son for the first time.
And when my mother went to the door, and I happened to be right there with my mother, she opened the door and she asked Mrs. Jeter, what in the world is that? And she could see a little foot sticking out.
Imagine growing up with parents who can't stop fighting and drinking. That was Jimi's life. His dad, Al, couldn't find a stable job, so they were super poor. The fights got so bad that Jimi would hide in a closet to escape. Things were rocky with his bro, Leon, too. Leon was in and out of foster care, and Jimi was always worried they'd be separated for good. And get this, Jimi had 3 younger siblings, but his parents gave them up for adoption. The family was always on the move, living in cheap hotels and apartments. Sometimes, they'd visit Jimi's grandma in Vancouver. But despite all the chaos, Jimi was a sensitive and shy kid who was deeply affected by his experiences. He even confessed to a girlfriend later in life that he was abused by someone in uniform. When Jimi was just 9, his parents got divorced and his dad got custody of him and Leon. On February 2, 1958, Jimi Hendrix's mom, Lucille, passed away from liver disease and a ruptured spleen. She was only 33 at the time. Jimi hadn't seen much of his mom before she died, and during her funeral, his dad, Al, didn't take him and his brother Leon. Instead, he gave them shots of whiskey, saying that's how men deal with loss. Daddy of the century, that's laced with heavy sarcasm, just in case you missed it. Early career. Due to some bad choices, Jimi Hendrix's freedom got cut short and his big dreams had to take a pause. Before he hit the big time, though, he had some run-ins with the law. Caught riding stolen cars twice, he faced a tough choice: jail or the Army. Jimi chose the Army and signed up on May 31, 1961. After basic training in California, Jimi landed in Kentucky with the 101st Airborne Division. He was struggling through it, missing his guitar back in Seattle. His dad came through, sending him his beloved red Silvertone Dane Electro, which he'd painted Betty Jean on. Jimi's obsession with his guitar caused some trouble. He neglected his duties, got teased by his mates, and even had his guitar hidden from him once. Things changed when Billy Cox heard Jimi playing and was blown away. They started jamming and soon formed a band, playing gigs on weekends. Jimi managed to earn his Screaming Eagles patch, but wasn't winning any awards for military discipline. By June 29, 1962, he got an honorable discharge, which was his ticket to chasing his dreams.
Jimi Hendrix, it goes without saying, changed the face of the earth.
Post-military life saw Jimi hustling on the Chitlin circuit in Tennessee, backing up big names like the Isley Brothers and Little Richard. He even played with stars like Ike and Tina Turner and Jackie Wilson. By late 1966, Jimi was in London with his own band, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, scoring big hits in the UK charts and setting the stage for his legendary career. Rocking out on BBC's Happening for Lulu show in January 1969, Jimi Hendrix and his band went rogue during their performance. They started playing Sunshine of Your Love out of the blue, leaving the show's director, Stanley Dorfman, pulling his hair out trying to stop them. Despite the chaos, it turned into one of their most iconic TV moments.
He was the last act on, and the floor manager was desperately trying to wind him up. That didn't stop Jimi.
Dorfman was fuming afterward and didn't want to talk to them. But despite the drama, Hendrix was clueless about any wrongdoing, seen as just a chill guy by Dorfman at the BBC club later. Legend has it, though, that this stunt got Hendrix banned from the BBC. During this time, the Experience toured around Scandinavia, West Germany, and played their last gigs in France. They capped it off with sold-out shows at London's Royal Albert Hall in February 1969, marking the end of that lineup. By then, bass player Noel Redding was fed up with Hendrix's unpredictable ways and control over the band's music. Their European tour had strained relations, especially between Hendrix and Redding. In early 1969, tensions boiled over in the studio, with Redding even ditching sessions for a pub break. The original Experience lineup's final gig was at Denver Pop Festival in June 1969, ending dramatically with tear gas and a crushed rental truck escape. Shortly after, a journalist broke the news to Redding that he'd been replaced by Billy Cox. Fuming, Redding quit and headed back to London to pursue his own path. Hendrix, meanwhile, retreated to a Shokan house near Woodstock to chill and write new tunes, backed by manager Michael Jeffrey's plans. It was a wild ride for the Experience, but the show went on, with Hendrix making waves on US TV like The Dick Cavett Show and The Tonight Show. After the Experience split, Jimi teamed up with drummer Buddy Miles and bassist Billy Cox to form the Band of Gypsies. Their live album, Band of Gypsies, was a total showcase of Hendrix's killer improvisational skills and soulful vibe. He was also cooking up new tracks for his next LP, but sadly, he passed away in September 1970 before he could finish it. Tracks like Voodoo Child, Slight Return, and All Along the Watchtower are still straight-up legendary. Jimi kept slaying on stage, making live performances that left crowds speechless with his insane guitar skills. His set at Woodstock in 1969, total icon status. Icon status implies access and resources, and access to a special kind of recreational, albeit dangerous resource: drugs.
Jimi Hendrix, regarded by millions as one of the most talented and original performers in modern pop music, is dead.
Drug use. When Jimi Hendrix hit up a jazz joint in Clarksville, Tennessee, back in July 1962, he wasn't just there for the music. He ended up blowing most of his hard-earned $400, which is over $4 grand today, on drinks, feeling all generous and handing out bills left and right. He left the place with just 16 bucks in his pocket. As for his drug scene, Jimmy was into some heavy stuff. LSD entered his world around 1967, maybe earlier, depending on who you ask. But it wasn't just acid. He dabbled in cannabis, hashish, amphetamines, and even the occasional drugs became part of his touring lifestyle, earning him a rep as a real trippy dude in the music scene. But when Jimmy mixed booze with drugs, watch out. His friends saw a whole different side of him, angry, violent, and totally unpredictable. Booze, especially, flipped a switch in him, unleashing a fury he rarely showed otherwise. In 1968, during a tour in Sweden, Hendrix got wasted and smashed through a plate glass window in a drunken brawl. He ended up in court with a hefty fine. Things got worse in California when he accused a friend of theft, got physical, and even injured his girlfriend during a jealous, drunken rage. And then there was that crazy incident at Toronto Airport in 1969, where authorities found drugs in his luggage. He insisted a fan planted them, and after a tense trial, he was acquitted. Drama followed Hendrix wherever he went, both on and off the stage.